The Disney movie Encanto, exactly where you expect this message to start, is about a family trying to find answers and healing in light of the stress and trauma inherited from former generations. One of those stresses being the alienation of a member of the family who hasn't been seen in years, Uncle Bruno. In order to deal with the difficulties, the pain of that loss, the family has chosen repression. We are going to ignore any questions, feelings, or worries related to his absence. This tendency is discussed in the musical number where they sing about how we don't talk about Bruno, no, no, no. Well, for us theologically orthodox Christians, sex is our Bruno. When I told Krishan that I was starting this message with this illustration, he immediately sang, "We don't talk about sex, oh no, no, no." Now the thing is, everybody else does, everywhere, all the time, forever it seems, but we don't. Our culture talks about sex incessantly, whether it's on the latest streaming service hit, in our political discourse, in our music. Evangelical Christianity has long felt the sting of sexual sin in our leaders and celebrities, and yet we still don't talk about it. But the problem is, if we don't talk about it, somebody else will. And so we shouldn't be surprised when people buy into another view of sex when our view is completely absent from the public sphere. The Christian author and counselor Paul Tripp put it this way. He said, "When it comes to sex, how many young people in Christian homes are struggling with questions, confusion, and temptation, but wouldn't think of seeking the help and wisdom of their embarrassed and silent parents?" And I say this as a parent to the other parents in the congregation. Your kids are hearing about this a lot earlier than you think they are. That's just the reality of the situation we live in now, whether they're homeschooled, private schooled, public schooled, etc. Sex is just out there, and it is getting in from various avenues, and if you aren't the one to talk to them about it, somebody else will. So this morning, we're going to be equipped from the Scriptures, and especially the wisdom literature in Proverbs and Song of Solomon, to talk and think about sex. What do we think about this as Christians? Where are we as people when it comes to this topic? I think we're going to see a little more clearly how both the world around us and even we as Christians, us as the church, often over or undervalues sex. And we're going to learn about a more helpful way of looking at it. That starts with the passage we just read from Genesis that Terry Jo read for us. Before we dove in this morning, that passage did a great job of outlining a general picture of what sex was designed to be according to the Bible. It was designed to be enjoyed within the context of marriage between one man and one woman. Sex is a good thing, but it is not the good thing. Sex shows us shows us the ability of those engaged in mutual love to come together across difference and create beauty, etc. There's a lot more you could talk about there in Genesis. But the culture around us today doesn't really buy into that idea of sex. And that might be an understatement. I think the reality is often that the culture around us detests that view of sex. Because our culture's view of sex, while not monolithic, I think our culture both greatly over and greatly undervalues the gift that God has given us in sex. Our culture, let's start by talking about how we overvalue sex. That one might be a little bit more obvious to all of us. In that our culture looks to sex for all sorts of things that it cannot provide. Our culture has expectations for sex that sex simply cannot fulfill. Our popular culture today is sex-crazed, sex-focused, and the overwhelming idea is that sex is, if not the thing that we are pursuing, then it is certainly one of the core things that we should pursue if we want to find fulfillment and happiness in life. Sex is the shiny object held out in front of us like a reflective fishing lure hovering in the water in front of the trout. We as a culture sell sex, we buy sex, we dream about sex through our books and movies and celebrity romance trackers. But sex really in some ways is like that shiny lure in front of the fish. If we bite onto it, we realize that it wasn't what it looked like the whole time. There's a really fantastic illustration of this in Proverbs 11, verse 22. It says, like a gold ring in a pig's snout is a beautiful woman without discretion. And I'll say right here before we go in, there's a lot of female-male language throughout Proverbs. Proverbs was originally written as kind of like our modern Boy Scout manual. The women and men were taught in different schools, and Proverbs was used mainly in male schools. So if you want to, you can 99% of the time just flip the gender language, and it still works both ways. It's wisdom for both genders. So here it talks about like a gold ring in a pig's snout. At first, it might just sound like a really good insult. You are like a gold ring in a pig's snout. I don't know exactly what's being insulted, but it's a good one. It has a ring to it. For those who are in the know, it sounds like something Martin Luther would have said. He was famous for being really good at insults. But if we dig down deeper, I think what this passage is really trying to be is a critique of the grab the shiny object human nature. That we all have this tendency to just grab for something without thinking about the consequences. This verse, in just a few words, is telling the story of a person walking along the road and they see a gold ring sticking out of a pile of mud and they think, excellent, and they just grab for it without looking closer and realize that it is attached to an angry pig who just had his nap interrupted. We as human beings just kind of go for it, and we might think, who's dumb enough to do that? Well, how often in our culture do we see the suggestion that we should evaluate our relationships with others, especially our romantic relationships with others, through the lens of outer beauty and sex appeal? Men and women are both guilty of this, albeit sometimes in different ways. Here, verse 22, in an instruction book for male students, is a specific slam towards men. It's saying, hey, this is a thing that you tend to do, evaluating women strictly by their looks. It's saying, you know this is a bad idea, but it doesn't keep you from falling into that trap. Brief note of application. Men in the room this morning, especially if you are young, unmarried men, we are the worst at seeing faults in ourselves. The person that we least clearly see in life is us. So you can't be watching you for this. You cannot depend solely on your own wisdom when it comes to seeking the right things in romantic relationships. Be surrounding yourselves with wise counselors. And women do the same thing. Because when we fall into this trap, it can have devastating effects on both genders. I saw firsthand working with teens when we were living in California how much of our modern anxiety and depression and worry is built around living up to the perceived standards and expectations of those around us. And if men tend to do this with physical appearance, women tend to do it too, albeit sometimes with other things. How many Instagram posts are there out there talking about how much someone wants a man to be making in salary before they'll consider dating him? How many millions of romance books have been sold that sell us on an idea of passion and sex that is described in perhaps just as unlikely and unreal a way as it is shown in pornography? We all have our different temptations in this area, men and women, but also just us as individual human beings. We're all different. We all have different things that pull at us, but in some way, sense, shape, or form, the Proverbs are telling us we have to watch out for this instinct to just go after the shiny object when it comes to romantic relationships, sex. Because we do this because we're sinners, because we're broken, because the culture around us is broken. Our culture overvalues sex by trying to get us to think that it's going to fulfill us in ways that it was never meant to. And at the same time, our culture drastically undervalues sex. It's an amazing and sad parallel that we somehow manage to make it too important and not important enough at the same time. We expect sex to do so much for us, and then we put such a low bar on engaging in it that we can't help but be disappointed. And most of the time, we don't even realize what we're doing. Proverbs 30:20 said, "This is the way of an adulteress." Again, you can just switch the genders. This is the way of an adulterer. "She eats and wipes her mouth and says, 'I have done no wrong.'" This isn't a picture of like willful rebellion. It's a picture of just, I don't know, what are you talking about? This is just the way that it is. This is just how we do serial sexuality as a culture. We undervalue sex and ourselves. And we don't even realize it because, again, we as Christians have been so quiet about this topic. Why would we not expect people to not realize that there's another option? We've bought into the world's story that this is the thing that I need in order to be happy, and therefore I need to do whatever it takes to get it back, even if that means changing who I am or pretending to want something that I don't. A few weeks ago, we talked about how we live in a culture whose view of sex is built around consent. Are both parties willing? Then go for it. We have barely any guardrails left around this basic rule. But that leads to a culture where we objectify others, because if the only bar is consent, then why not just aim at the shiniest gold ring and see if I can hop that terribly low bar? But it also leads to objectifying ourselves, because if consent is the only bar to a sexual relationship, and if the thing that will give me worth is that sexual relationship, then I'm only as valuable as the people who will jump that bar. And so now my goal in life is to become as attractive of a shiny gold object as I can and to keep my bar as low as possible. It's a heartbreakingly dehumanizing view of sex, devaluing of us as human beings made in the image of God. No wonder our society's view of sex is falling apart. No wonder we have more access to pornography than any society in human history, the objectification of women at an industrial scale. No wonder our young men are looking around and saying, what is it that makes me a man? If this is the goal in my life, then I just need to be, again, the shiniest gold object, whether that's my looks or my bank account or my whatever it is that's going to make me look attractive. No wonder more and more young people are opting out of the system entirely. I'd like to take a quick break here from bashing our culture to maybe talk a bit about what does a better way look like? What is a Christian better way look like? Because this isn't what the Bible tells us sex is supposed to be about. The Bible goes way beyond the consent paradigm that we have today. It says this isn't good enough. This isn't far enough. It just isn't enough. It says sex was supposed to be part of a covenant paradigm. It was supposed to be a sign and expression of the deep and beautiful intimacy possible between two people who are totally committed to each other's well-being, who are seeking the best for each other in all things, even when it's hard, even when it's tough, even when the world says you should just go ahead and give up. It's supposed to be a sign of two people saying, no, we will not let go no matter what. The Bible's idea of sex isn't, is everybody okay with it, then fine. The Bible's idea of sex is, does this reflect a total heartfelt commitment from both people involved for the good and the welfare and the joy and the growth and the love and the care of each other? All of the Bible's no's to sex outside of the context of a lifelong covenant marriage between a man and a woman are there to protect and reinforce his emphatic yes to sex in that context. And then in the New Testament, when we see the Bible affirming both marriage and celibacy as good ways to live our lives, we're reminded that while sex is a wonderful gift, it is not a necessary one to live a full and good and true life. The Bible strangely elevates sex above the world's idea of it, but also takes sex off of the pedestal that the world's put it on that says, this is why you're alive. This is what makes your life worth living. This is where the good in life is to be found. All those good things being said, we're going to dip back in briefly to a couple of ways that we as a church tend to overvalue and undervalue sex too. I think we as a church, and when I say we as a church, I mean Christians as a whole in our context, not we specifically here at Hope. This is all of us. We as a church tend to undervalue sex, at least in part because we just don't talk about it. You talk about the things you care about, right? There's a reason, I had not planned this, and I apologize if it offends anyone. There's a reason that you hear so much about CrossFit and veganism from the people who are engaged in them. It matters to them in life. There's a reason you hear so much about from people who have found the new TV show that is their favorite thing in life, or the new favorite place to go, or how many of you have somebody who has just had their first grandchild and you see pictures every 3 seconds, and this we talk about, we bring up the things that we really care about in life. And yet, for us as the church, remember, sex is Bruno. We don't talk about it. I Googled yesterday, what topics do pastors not like to talk about? And every single list was sex at the very top of it. But when we look at the Bible, there's a fact here that might make us a little uncomfortable this morning. And for those who have been doing the readings with us this week, that I would guess have already been making us uncomfortable. No, I did not plan to weasel my way out of doing the daily videos on the week that we were talking about Song of Solomon. But am I happy that it worked out that way? Yes, I am. For those of us who have been reading Song of Solomon this week, I bet we've already been made uncomfortable by the fact that the Bible is not anywhere close to as squeamish as we are when it comes to talking about sex. In fact, at times, sex within marriage is described in such erotic terms that it makes me blanch and blush even now. Let's read Proverbs 5:15 through 19, shall we? Oh, you know where we're going. All right. This is all in the context of married sex. This is talking to an individual who is married and talking about what is wisdom for you in your sex life. Drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Pause. Cisterns and wells are one of the most common images for female sexuality in the Bible. You go down into the well. You enter it. I'm just going to let you think about that for a second and why that's the image. Okay. All right, we're moving on. Verses 16 and 17. Should your springs be scattered abroad, streams of water in the streets? No, let them be for yourself alone and not for strangers with you. Talking to the man. Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth. Wells are the image for female sexuality. Fountains are the image for male sexuality, again for obvious reasons. Verse 19. A lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts fill you at all times with delight. Be intoxicated always in her love. That word for intoxicated there has a very specific mental image to it, and it's this. It's saying be enjoying your sex life together as a married couple to the point where you are staggering in your enjoyment of it. Definitely no specific metaphors going on there. I don't like talking about this. I have 4 little demonstrations walking around the church that prove that I know what I'm talking about, but I still don't like talking about it. None of us like talking about it. And yet, this is what the writer of the wisdom literature wants us to think about when we think about the married sex life. We're supposed to be staggeringly drunk in how we experience that area of our relationship with our spouses. The Bible, I think, actually even shows us a line of how we should be willing and unwilling to speak about sex. Because the Bible isn't shy about euphemizing, about kind of talking about sex in general ways and kind of saying, yeah, we know how this... And at times, it is descriptive when necessary, when it's important, when it has to be said. And yet it also tries to protect the dignity and privacy of the specific sexual relationship between a husband and wife. It's okay talking about the general idea, but it doesn't tend to dive into the details of your specific relationship. I like to think of Song of Solomon and often the Proverbs as well. It's kind of like a movie that is okay showing you the happy couple enjoying each other and moving towards the door of the bedroom, and then it lets the door shut and pans away, as opposed to our culture that these days kind of wants the camera to follow in. That's how the Bible kind of looks at how we talk about sex as a whole. But there's a second point here on how we as a church undervalue sex. Before we move on, the Bible isn't quiet about how married couples are supposed to enjoy sex, and the Bible isn't quiet about people for whom sex is hard or non-existent. We remember a few weeks ago the story of Amnon and Tamar, and how after her assault, Tamar went to live in her brother Absalom's house as if she were a widow. She was traumatized by the pain of her attack. In Matthew 19:12, Jesus has this fascinating verse where he talks about three kinds of eunuchs. A eunuch is someone who doesn't participate in sex, somebody who doesn't have sex. Simple as that. You can go a little further beyond that, but that's the basic definition. Jesus says there are eunuchs who have been so from birth. First, there are those with physical deformities or handicaps that make sex difficult or impossible. Second, he says, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men. There are those who have suffered. There are those who have been hurt. There's those who have been attacked or experienced violence in a way that makes sex difficult or impossible. And then finally, he talks about there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. In other words, there are those who have said, I cannot currently enjoy sex in the manner in which God has told me is right and true and good. In other words, I am not within a marriage, in the covenant bonds of a marriage, and so I will abstain from it entirely. And the Bible, Jesus affirms that all of these are real and important situations that people might find themselves in. And it says that those people are not walled off from the good promises and the beauty of God. It says that while the goodness of life may be expressed in sex, that it is certainly not only or even mainly expressed there. Rachel Welcher is a Christian author, and she wrote, "We need to crush the myth that good sexual behavior is rewarded with marriage. The longer we teach this, the longer we talk about marriage as a God-given promise or a Christian's highest good, the more we set singles up to feel abandoned by God and by the church." And I would say singles, but also just folks who, for one reason or another, because of our brokenness and the brokenness of the world around us, sex is not or cannot what it was meant to be. And if we're thinking about that last statement, about how we have this tendency to think about how good sexual behavior is rewarded, I think this leads us to talk about how we as the church tend to overvalue sex as well. And this is what I call the prosperity theology approach to sex. And it goes two ways. The first is, if I do the right things in life, God will reward me for them in marriage, in sex, and so on and so forth moving forward. I had a guy that I mentored in college. He was a couple years younger than me. It's so weird to talk about mentoring someone who's basically your age, but college is that weird space where everybody's right next to each other, and 2 years actually does make a big difference. So I was mentoring this guy for a couple of years. I ended up being in his wedding, being part of the bridal party. I knew his wife, I knew him. I loved and cared for both of them. We were so excited for them. They didn't live particularly near us, and so we didn't stay super close. And so we were really surprised when we found out about 2 or 3 years later that they were getting divorced. And so I called them up, sent them messages, kind of tried to figure out what had happened. And it turns out that it hadn't been easy for them. It hadn't been easy in a lot of different areas, but specifically in the area of their sexual relationship. It hadn't been easy. There had been things in their past, issues, traumas, physical handicaps, that made things really hard. And I found out that I had really failed that guy that I mentored because I didn't ask the right questions to realize that he was going in with a prosperity theology view of sex, where he said, I haven't had sex yet. I haven't had sex with anyone else. I've saved myself for marriage, and that means God owes me easiness here. That God owes me that it'll all go well, that it'll all flow smooth, that everything will be okay because I did the right thing, so everything's going to be easy on the other side of it. We as a church overvalue sex when we say, I am doing the right things so that I get this and so that I get it in the way that I want it. But we also overvalue sex when we look at our behavior as leading the other way as well. There's a famous conference where a speaker handed out a rose at the beginning of his presentation and asked everyone in the room to go pass around the rose. And so he's giving his presentation on sex and what Christians should think about sex. And at the end of the presentation, the rose is passed all the way around the room. And it finally gets back to him. And of course, after being grabbed and handled by thousands of people, it's falling apart, the leaves are dragging off, it's bedraggled, etc., etc. And the speaker of the conference says, now who would want something like this? trying, I guess, to say that you're less valuable as a person because you've had sex before marriage. The person who shared that illustration famously, I'll go try to find a clip sometime if I can and put it on the church Facebook page. The person giving the illustration stops and becomes very obviously emotional. And he just I remember he yells, "Jesus wants the rose." Doing the wrong thing sexually outside of marriage doesn't make you less valuable. It doesn't make you less worthy of being loved. It doesn't make Jesus care about you less. There are these two different ways we can go with this as Christians, where we say, I do the good thing and so God owes me, or I do the bad thing and now I don't have hope. And the Bible says neither of those are right. Neither of those are true. So let's go ahead and end here. Let's wrap things up. What is the good and right and true way to look at sex for us as Christians? I think we've heard echoes of it throughout. We've started diving into it, but let's go all the way there. I think the Bible gives us a way to look at sex that is not the middle point of overvaluing and undervaluing sex. It is instead above and beyond and greater than what either of those two broken misunderstandings could imagine that sex is supposed to be about. Let's go back into Proverbs again. Proverbs 30:18 through 19 says, 3 things are too wonderful for me. 4 I do not understand. The way of an eagle in the sky, the way of a serpent on a rock, the way of a ship on the high seas, and the way of a man with a virgin. That's marital sex. It's a way that the Bible often describes marital sex. This proverb, and the Bible as a whole, offers us a way of looking at sex that says, it is beautiful, it is mysterious, it is wonderful, it's amazing. Sex within the confines in which God has placed it is a good and true thing, and it's not the thing. What did the passage say again? 3 things I do not understand, 4 that are a mystery to me. It talks about nature, it talks about creativity, it talks about building things, it talks about the glory of the world around us, and sex. It's beautiful, it's mysterious, it's wonderful. It's not the only thing. It's not the thing that crowns everything else. I think this is the really important yes and for us as Christians. Yes, sex is wonderful and mysterious and fantastic, and it's not the only thing that matters. It's not the thing that makes your life good. It's not the thing that'll fix your relationship. It's not the thing that'll make everything better. It's not the thing that'll make you feel fulfilled in life. It is a good thing. And it's a good thing that is, in fact, supposed to point the arrow more and more towards the good thing. In the New Testament, we find Paul talking about sex in 1 Corinthians 7, 3 through 5. Paul writes, "The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer. But then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control." So Paul, whom our culture would think of as famously prudish, says to the married couples that he is counseling, don't go too long without having sex. Don't do it. He says it's a good gift from God. It's been given to you for the health of your relationship, the creation of children, the glorifying of God. But Paul also says there are other things at times in your life that are more important and that can supersede sex for seasons. He says prayer specifically, that might be something you want to abstain from sex to be involved with prayer. And by extension, he's saying your relationship with God is even better than this. The things that draw you close to God can be an even greater gift in your life than sex. And in this image of sex in 1 Corinthians 7, we find a hint at what sex is supposed to ultimately point us toward in the mutuality of verses 3 and 4, where it talks about the wife's body is not her own, but the husband's body is not his own, but the wife's. There is one side of that equation that would have been a duh in ancient society, and one side that would have been I'm sorry, what did you just say? The church has always been steadfast that marriage, and therefore sex within marriage, was to be a picture of mutuality, a picture of both people living a life of self-sacrifice, of giving of themselves for the good of the other, of laying down one's own life in trust and humility for the sake of the one that you love. of an eternal covenant dedication to love and provide for each other apart from the worthiness of each other. And in this, sex, like marriage as a whole, is supposed to be a reminder of God's relationship with his people. Not necessarily the physical act of sex. We went through the Jesus is my boyfriend period of Christian music. I think we're done with it and we can keep putting the dirt on its grave, thankfully. Not that. We don't need to make weird, creepy analogies here. But the principle of it, the idea of it, the very concept of coming together in love, this is supposed to be something that points us to the one who gave himself for us. If sex is designed to point towards Jesus, self-giving, self-sacrificial, mutually loving relationship, if it's supposed to point us towards Jesus, then sex isn't the ultimate good in our lives. That our culture, it's not on the pedestal that our culture wants to put it on. Jesus is on that pedestal. And that means that if we're at a point in our lives where sex is allowable and encouraged for us as Christians, then great! Use it to glorify him by enjoying the good gifts that he gave us in the way that he commanded. And if we're not in that place in our lives, if we're widowed, single, physically or emotionally incapable of sex because of harm done to me or some other reason, or if you're in a situation where your sexual desires don't line up for God's plan with sex because they point you towards someone with whom you're not in a biblical covenant marriage, in any of those situations, we can still experience the wholeness and completeness in life that sex is pointing towards. Because our lives aren't about sex, they're about the God who created sex and the loving, self-sacrificing, self-giving relationship that he has invited us into and called us to show to others.